So people often ask me why I'm the CEO of the Hindu group. I say I'm the CEO because I'm not good enough to be the editor of the Hindu. Newspaper reading in India is still intact. It's strong because you've got a set of people who are used to it and they continue to read it. I'm not a huge believer of business models that are overly dependent on advertising. The job of our business is to ensure that our journalism succeeds. So Twitter has made a journalist of everybody. Everybody has a point of view. Firstly, be grateful for where you are. Not many people manage to get in an institute like this.
Today, we have with us Mr. Navaneeth, a seasoned professional with a diverse career spanning over 2 decades. Currently serving as the CEO of the Hindu Group, he has held this position since June 29, showcasing his dedication and leadership over the last 4 years. With prior roles as a leader in trading at Mindshare in Indonesia, VP of Programming at Sun TV Network, and General Manager of Advertising and Marketing at the Hindu Group of Publications, Navaneeth has a wealth of experience in various facets of the media and entertainment industry. So welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure being here.
So thank you, Navaneeth, for taking out the time and really appreciate you coming from Chennai to Delhi. Our students have sent a lot of questions, which I'm going to ask one by one. And then at the end, we'll also keep some time for the live Q&A. So first of all, let's just start with your journey, the professional journey of the kind of decisions that you made and the choices, that has led you to become the CEO of the Hindu Group today.
Yeah, so I started my career after my post-graduation at the Hindu because that's a brand I grew up reading. I know it's very different today in terms of how people read and what they consume. So from campus, I went to the Hindu and begged them for a job. So they hired me and I worked there for a little over 8 years. I joined as an executive and I think I was general manager, largely doing advertising and marketing. Then I quit the Hindu and I joined a radio station. I was the first employee of a radio station in 2007 in Chennai. I literally built it. I mean, it wasn't my radio station. I was working for the Midday Group. So this was a radio station, Midday and BBC I had put together. And BBC also was one brand I was always fascinated with. So I worked there for 3 years, set it up, built it, learned audio for the first time in my life. And after 3 years, I moved to broadcasting. So I worked in Sun TV Network, which is India's largest regional network television with presence in 4 languages. I think they run around 30 channels. So I ran their channels in 2 languages, in Kannada and in Telugu, because I'm familiar with both the languages. Did that for around 6 years. Mm-hmm. And one fine morning, I woke up and asked questions like, what is life? What am I doing? What's my purpose? And I didn't have answers to any of those. I had these questions, but I didn't have answers. So I said, I'll take a break from working and try to figure out these answers. Mm-hmm. So I took a sabbatical. It wasn't a sabbatical because in a sabbatical, you are assured of a job when you come back. Here, I didn't have a job and I was over 40. I'd worked for many years. Took a break and I think got back in touch with people who mattered, traveled a lot, learned some new skills. For instance, I learned masonry. I built a memorial for my grandfather during that time. I also learned digital marketing. Did that for 6-7 months and I was okay because I didn't have EMIs and I had a very supportive family. My wife was working, so money was never an issue. Then when I wanted to get back to work, I thought I should work in some other country for some time. So I went to Indonesia and worked in a media agency. Now, media agencies typically advise clients about how to invest their advertising dollars. So you decide on targeting, you decide on budgeting, and you decide on channel management. Channel management is how much in digital, how much in traditional, how much on videos, how much on standard formats, etc. So that I did for a little over 3 years, worked in multiple markets, and then came back to the Hindu to run the company. So back to first love.
Great. And as you said, back to the first love, right? What are, and they are just going to start their careers in 2-3 years, right? When you made these switches, what was the reasoning or what was the thought process behind these switches, and how should one think about it?
I think the first tool I followed is do something for a reasonable amount of time. Because if you do anything for too short a period,
Yeah.
A, you don't learn enough from it. B, you don't give back to the organization sufficiently. When in 2006, I always wanted to run a media company, and I had a feeling that the media company of 2006 wouldn't be similar to the media company in 2018 or 19. So my belief was media companies will become multimedia, multi-format, multi-language, and those are skills I didn't have. I'd worked in publishing, which is largely text-based. So I worked in audio, I worked in broadcasting. And it's also important to understand the flow of money from a demand side. When you're in media, you're on the supply side of money. When you work in agencies and manage client budgets, you understand the demand side of it. So that was one reason I did all these stints. Second, I also wanted to challenge myself and do new things. For instance, when I moved from the Hindu to radio, I had seen a radio just about it. I knew nothing about radio, so I went and learned everything about radio. But I worked in a market I was familiar in. So I had worked in Chennai for 8 years. I had my contacts there. I knew the culture of the place. So I only had to learn a medium. When I went to broadcasting, it was a new industry and a new city. So from Chennai, I was based in Bangalore and Hyderabad. I didn't have roots there. I knew the culture to a certain extent, but not an expert. You didn't have the right connections. So a little bit more difficult. So you're learning a new job in a new place. The final was even more difficult. I had never worked in an agency before. So it was a new job, new country, and new culture. So imagine you go to a new market and you're advising clients on how to spend their money, and you know nothing about the culture of that place. So it's like somebody comes to Masters Union and talks about cinema and doesn't know who Shah Rukh Khan is, right? So you'll fall flat on your. So it's been the curiosity to learn with varying degrees of difficulty throughout the career. And while I did general marketing and management in the Hindu, I did a bit of HR and balance sheet in radio because it was a P&L role. In television, I learned content. I had never done content before. In the agency side, I got to understand categories, how categories work, how businesses work. So it sort of adds to an all-round experience, which is required to run a business in totality. You need to be good at a few things. You need to be very good at a few things, and you need to be reasonably good at multiple things to run a company successfully. And I think that's why I did what I did. And it's paid off to a large extent.
Fair. The ability to learn new things, right? And that curiosity, I think, and especially when you mentioned that break that you took and learned digital marketing and all of that. Now, I think our students have a good exposure, I would say, to the latest industries, and they keep talking about, let's say, e-commerce or D2C brands and all of that. But journalism is an industry that we don't hear a lot about in the new generation, right? So can you, as the journalism expert, can you dissect that business for us?
Yeah.
Right,
So,
how it makes money and all of that.
Only caveat is I'm not a journalist. So people often ask me, why are you the CEO of the Hindu Group? I say I'm the CEO because I'm not good enough to be the editor of the Hindu Group. But I understand what journalism is about. In terms of business models, we'll speak about the news industry in general, not necessarily publishing or broadcasting. The news industry makes its money from three sources largely. So one is what we call revenue from the end user. So the end user could be a viewer or a reader. So in a newspaper, it's cover price. People pay cover price to get the newspaper.
Yeah.
Or you pay some money to get a channel on your handheld devices or television. So this is the end user revenue. So that's one source of revenue. The dominant source of revenue is the advertising revenue. which is I have an audience, I'm able to monetize that audience by ensuring advertiser messages are exposed to the audience I have. So that's the other stream of revenue. So in newspaper terms, we call it reader revenue, then you call it advertiser revenue. And the third source of revenue is other revenue. Now, other revenue usually could be syndication. So your content gets syndicated to multiple people and you charge a license for that. You could use our archival content and syndicate it to multiple people. You could also do events using your brands, create your own IPs, and those events are either participant funded or they are advertiser funded. So largely these are through three sources of revenue. Different companies have different revenue models. Now, for instance, online, many people don't have subscriber revenue or reader revenue because they're free. Same with television. There's free-to-air channels which don't make money from subscription. Largely, advertising is a large portion of the revenue that news companies make, both online, offline, print, television, and so on. So these are the three large streams of revenue for a media company.
And this is the revenue side that you've talked about. Now let's talk about the cost side as well, because then we'll come to the bottom line. So what are the biggest costs? I'm assuming it's the journalists, but you'll have to tell us what it is.
Yeah, the biggest cost is the cost of content, the cost of producing content and distributing content. And it varies by, it's different for a newspaper, it's different for broadcasting, and it's very different online. For a newspaper, the largest cost is the cost of printing the newspaper, because you use newsprint to print it.
Yeah.
The number one line item on the cost for a newspaper is newsprint, followed by people costs, followed by other costs. That's for the newspaper business. But if I look at the digital business, the number one cost will probably be people. Second would be tech.
Understood.
Tech is a very high cost, but cost of distribution is very low because you're housing your content in the cloud, and the cost that you need to serve a single reader is minuscule compared to the newspaper.
Okay.
So largely people cost, raw material cost, tech cost. These are large costs.
And now, as you mentioned about the digital, right? The digital media is completely different. The cost structure is different. The revenue streams are different, and all of that. And let's take a survey here. How many of you read newspapers, like the physical newspapers? Raise your hand. So obviously the percentage of population
Encouraging.
compared to what it was probably 15 years ago has come down. We have all
Certainly.
gone digital.
Right.
So how are newspapers, and especially the Hindu group, adjusting their own business in response to this disruption?
See, while the number of people who read newspapers in a cohort like this is very small, and I'm actually encouraged by the number of hands that went up. I was expecting it to be a bit lower. Newspaper reading in India is still intact. It's strong because you've got a set of people who are used to it, and they continue to read it. The challenge is to get younger people into the newspaper reading habit at the beginning of at the time when they get into reading. That's a challenge. That wasn't a challenge a few years ago. The other challenge is the newspaper readership grew in this country at the left end of the spectrum because new readers were coming in. It also used to grow significantly at the middle of the spectrum because of people becoming literate. So I learned English for the first time. I want to read an English newspaper. I just learned Hindi or a Malayalam. So they started reading, and for many years readership was growing and growing. Now the challenge is left end of the spectrum, you're not getting in enough new readers.
Yeah.
And the middle of the spectrum, which is the new literate, their consumption is video, not text. So they consume news, but not this.
Correct.
So those are challenges. But if the audience is moving online, you need to move online. And how do you differentiate your offerings between the physical world and the digital world? What are your business models? For instance, in our case, I'm not a huge believer of business models that are overly dependent on advertising. Because when you build business models that are dependent on advertising, Uh, there are a lot of things you don't control. You don't control macroeconomy. You don't control slumps in the investment cycle, and you can't blame somebody else for your problems. So a
Yeah.
business that is built with a good balance of reader revenue and advertising revenue is robust. And my belief is that's how we should build our digital products, which are largely reader revenue driven, and you also monetize advertising. So on digital today, 50% of our revenues come from reader revenue.
Okay.
50% of revenue is from reader revenue, 50% is advertising. Far more healthier than the physical side of the business. Now, if you want to build a digital business around subscription,
Yeah.
it's not just attracting eyeballs, but it is getting people to open their purse strings. So I think fundamentally one needs to look at what is the difference between a physical newspaper and a digital offering. And we have run a physical newspaper for 144 years. The Hindu turned 144 on September 20th, that old. So typically when you look at a physical newspaper,
Yeah.
let's say one of you is the editor of a physical newspaper, you have editions in multiple cities, right? So you have a Delhi edition, a Chandigarh edition, or a Chennai edition, a Bangalore edition. The first filter of segmentation while constructing a physical newspaper is geography. So you start with geographic segmentation. And even the newspaper is constructed by geography, right? So you have city news, your state news, your country news. And then you add areas of interest. So areas of interest are, let's say you have a business page, you have a sports page,
Politics.
you have a politics page. And within that, you come back and do geography. So for instance, in a business page, how can I do a local business story? In a sports page, can I cover college sports? So that's the construct of a physical newspaper. And physical newspaper, because it's the same product going to multiple people within a given geography, it is tailored for width over depth. There's a lot of width, and it speaks to the lowest common multiple among your target audience.
Fair.
So we might have an elitist audience, but within that we speak to the lowest common denominator.
Correct.
So for instance, if I'm doing something on economics, I wouldn't write for a Nobel laureate. I would write for a first year MA economics student.
Yeah.
So that's the physical world, and that works well. Now on digital, if you want people to pay money, nobody would pay you money for what's available elsewhere, what's available free of cost elsewhere. The first filter of segmentation in digital is areas of interest and not geography. Geography becomes an area of interest, and that's a huge difference. So people want politics, people want sports, people want science, people want health, wellness,
Business
entrepreneurship,
news. Yeah.
startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
So digital is more about depth than width. First layer of segmentation is areas of interest and not geography. So they're very different. So if you can use the width that the newspaper offers, because you have a bunch of people working there and you're producing content, repurpose that to digital, and you add depth in areas of interest that people are willing to pay for, that is when I think you can build a successful news business. And it doesn't matter whether somebody is consuming the newspaper or somebody is reading us off our website or app. Very different, and extremely different for legacy companies to make that shift, because we are used to doing things for 140 years in a particular way. Last 4 years, we are trying to do things differently.
Yeah.
But I think we are able to leverage what we have done well in the past, add bells and whistles to that content, and create new areas of content which are of depth and which people are willing to pay for. That is what we are trying to do.
No, I mean, one of your examples, I just want to build on that. So you said when you are sending a newspaper to a physical home and all of geography, you can only take into account the lowest common multiple or denominator, whatever it is. That made me think about the education business. So here, in a class of 60 people, I can only do the content in a way that all 60 can understand.
Correct.
And yes, the levels of maturity in a course, economics, marketing, whatever, would be different, but you have to cater to all 60.
Yeah.
But in the digital world, the picture completely changes. You are doing one-on-one, and everything can be customized to the learner's ability. So I think the game completely changes.
It does.
And there, I think models where you can also send in content based on the interest of the person or the reader is super important, right? They shouldn't be searching for what is relevant to them. It should
No, it
pop
is.
up
Yeah,
automatically.
and you're absolutely right. And it's like, it's also like minors and majors, right?
Yeah.
And it's foundation course versus specialization.
Correct.
The treatment is different. While it's LCM for physical, it's HCF for digital. And to use an example from science, if Stephen Hawking works for physical, Einstein works for digital. So
Correct. And I think that's also, you can keep your readers hooked, because when I consume digital news right now, I'll skim through. And if things that are popping up are relevant to me, I
You will
will
consume.
read.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's very easy to just switch off.
it is. That's a challenge.
So that's a different ballgame altogether. Now, one of the key trends we definitely know in the world of journalism is digital disruption. Are there other key trends in the world of journalism that are disrupting the industry today?
I think in terms of disruption, and it's true of every industry, and the news industry and the business of journalism is no different. I think broadly you could look at seismic shifts, and you could look at evolutionary shifts, and I'll try and touch upon both. And the business of newspapers is 200 years old, but I speak from my experience, which is around 2.5 decades. The amount of years I've seen this business fairly closely from. In terms of seismic shifts, I think the first seismic shift was the internet. The internet changed things like nothing before it.
Yeah.
First was internet itself. Second was search. Because search became the way to discover stuff. And before search, I don't know what we used to do before search, but we used to do something else. Search was a seismic shift. Mobile phone, access of data on mobile, reducing cost of data access on mobile, was a third seismic shift. And each of them have multiple implications. So these are major seismic shifts.
Yeah.
The next seismic shift that we are witness to now, we are trying to figure out what it means. We know it's a seismic shift. We don't know what shape it will take. Is AI. So after mobile, fourth is AI. What will happen? We have to see. So these are massive seismic shifts. In terms of you could add social also to it. After search came social. So suddenly everybody is a journalist, right? So Twitter has made a journalist of everybody. Everybody has a point of view. Earlier we used to tell what you need to read or what you need to consume, and this is our vision of what we believe society should be like. Now with social, everybody has a view. So social also is again a seismic shift. The implications of this, which have been evolutionary in nature, is stuff like citizen journalism. Everybody having a point of view. Media no longer being one-way telling, but two-way caring and sharing. And diminishing attention spans. And diminishing attention spans are linked with social, internet, search. So the seismic shifts, there are evolutionary changes. Some of them we have figured out to deal with. Some we are figuring out how to deal with. But if you ask me disruptions, largely these are the disruptions. And to study disruptions in any business, I find gradual changes and sudden changes a useful framework to think about. And you'll find relevant answers when you think of changes impacting businesses, impacting consumers in any business. So for our business, these are the seismic and evolutionary changes.
Absolutely. And students had a question on Twitter specifically, saying how do you address declining?
Now it's X.
Now X.
So thanks to Ms.
How do you address this declining attention spans to engage your audience?
I mean, there's no clear answer to it, right? An obvious answer is you serve everything mini-sized. But if you serve everything mini-sized, you will create a society that speaks in bullet points, things in micro bullet points, and has a unidimensional view. So that obviously is not a solution we think will work.
Yeah.
We believe in certain principles, we believe in a particular purpose, but the mechanisms to serve this to attention deprived audience through design.
Fair.
So, for instance, can I write a lovely summary at the beginning of an article? So, if that interests somebody, he or she is tempted to read it, the full form. But if you don't have time at that moment in time, can I offer you a bookmarking facility so that you can come back and revisit it?
Yeah.
So, what we do hasn't fundamentally changed, but the devices we employ to make it more palatable, to be a 2-minute version of what you like and to be a 2-day version of what you love. If you're able to manage it through interface and design, I think you can solve for it. You can't solve for it completely, but you can solve for it for a large extent.
Fair. And one of the crucial questions that comes in when your payer is not the customer, right? So as you said that your customer revenue is not as much as the advertiser's revenue, the balance of integrity, right, with revenue generation doesn't happen in those cases. So can you share how media companies are trying to tread that line because the revenue is coming from somewhere else, but the reader is somebody else?
See, it boils down to what your purpose is and how deeply invested you are in purpose. And I won't answer for media in general, but I could speak about our approach in specific. One of the reasons we want a healthy mix of reader revenue and advertiser revenue is you're not over-dependent on advertising revenue.
Correct.
And there are pressures that come with being over-dependent on advertising revenue. But if you build a strong enough model that has pull from a reader's side, you can mitigate those risks. It also depends on how you view your own business. So, for instance, in our case, our editors and journalists manage our content. They are our voice, they are our conscience, they manage content. Business teams works with them. And what we deliver to end customers is the experience of the product, be it a physical newspaper or a website or an app. And what we deliver to advertisers are audiences. Now, in our case, we believe the custodians are content, our conscience keepers, our voice, our editors and journalists. And I have defined the job of business, the job of our business to ensure that our journalism succeeds.
Mm-hmm.
And what does success mean? Success means making a difference at scale. Success means the ability to have a longer life. Success means to make money so that you reinvest it in quality resources, quality tech, etc.
Yeah.
But if you put journalism ahead of everything, then you probably will stay true to integrity.
Yeah. So I think you're saying it's the intent at the end of the day. Like nobody can kind of control this except for you yourself. Any advice for our students here?
No, I think today we are at a stage where they all can advise us. So the only advice that comes from is our own lived experiences, right? So all of us have a lived experience. There are things to share. A couple of things I would leave all of you with. You're still in your first year, 3 years to go. Firstly, be grateful for where you are. Not many people manage to get into an institute like this. And I was blown away when I saw what you do, and I like this whole idea of learning business by doing business. Alien concepts during our time.
Yeah.
So all of you are privileged in your own way to be here. So be grateful for where you are. Be extremely grateful to your parents and to your families. That this comes as a father whose daughter is
Talk
your age.
Talk to them every day.
So, second, use campuses like this to learn from each other. I think obviously you learn enough from lectures and faculty and But the biggest learning you will get is from each other. So spend time with each other, discuss, learn the art of disagreement, learn how to disagree well,
Yeah.
and that you'll learn from peer groups. Do stuff that really interests you to the extent possible, or find something which will give you time to do stuff that interests you. Careers and jobs are not always a means to an end. I mean, they're not always an end in itself. Often they could be means to an end. Read a lot, watch a lot, consume lots of content. Be in touch with popular culture. And one of the reasons, you're all fortunate to be in the heart of the city, so you're in touch with culture around you, life around you. Insights come from culture, right? And everything you do will be there.
Yeah.
And whatever you do, give it a long shot. So some of you will start working, some of you will probably study more. If you're planning to study more, see if you can get some work experience outside of the work experience you get as part of your 4-year course.
Yeah.
Because learning on the job helps you understand theory far better when you study more. And this is something Shiv Kumar told this class: give anything you do at least 3 years.
Absolutely.
3 years is the minimum time you need to be committed to anything. Those are some of the thoughts I think I can share with all of them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. With that, we wrap up the session. A huge round of applause for Navaneeth.